Yeah, okay, we started recording, so over to you.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, good day to you. My name is Warren Winterbottom, and for the next 30 to 40 minutes, I will be your facilitator for this webinar entitled the 2017 SaaS and Cloud Business Development Webinar Series. The purpose of the webinar series is to help organizations who are transitioning to or beginning to implement a SaaS environment and to help those software and services companies build revenue faster at lower risk. The seminar series has four major components, as you can see from this particular slide. Today's conversation will be hosted by the guest speaker, Mr. John Miller, and he will be speaking about new approaches to SaaS business development and planning. On February the 8th, we will be presenting Preparing Your Business for 2017 with the latest SoftLetter SaaS report delivered by our guest speaker, Mr. Rick Chapman, who is the CEO of SoftLetter. The third segment of the webinar series is business opportunities in the hybrid SaaS and cloud environment, and that keynote will be delivered by Pulsant. Pulsant is a sister company and partner of Delta SaaS Services, and fundamentally they are building a business of hosting cloud services for ISVs. Which was most appropriate in terms of the implementation of SaaS applications. And then last but not least, on March the 8th, Mr. Mark Sweetko will be delivering an address regarding transforming your sales teams for a SaaS and cloud environment. Mr. Sweetko has been focusing on sales enabling and sales transformation applications and training for many years, and one of his largest customers is SAP. So that should be a very, very interesting series. So we have a series of expert presenters. Today, as I mentioned, Mr. John Miller, who is the CEO of Delta SaaS Services. And at the end of the seminar, Mr. Miller will be presenting some gifts for our webinar attendees today. What I'd like to do is just give you a brief overview of Delta. Delta SaaS Services has offices on a worldwide basis with their principal offices in the United Kingdom, in the United States of America, and in India. The company was founded in 1995 and 2 years ago celebrated its 20th anniversary with the purpose of helping software companies grow with expert knowledge, data, and tools. The services that have been presented have been running the gamut from business development to business metrics as well as to contact data and information. Delta is also associated with a group of partners I mentioned earlier of SoftLetter and Pulsant and Sita, but Delta is also partnering with Eames, which is a global company, traditionally a telemarketing organization, but now has transitioned into services for outsourcing sales management operations as well as channel management operations. So these range of services provided by Delta as well as their partner have been delivering value to those companies that are moving into the SaaS environment. So with that brief introduction, I would like to introduce my colleague, Mr. John Miller, but before I do, please feel free to know that there will be an audio and a slide deck available within 24 hours of this webinar. And also, during the webinar, you will have an opportunity to ask questions electronically, and at the end of the webinar, we would be happy to respond to those questions. If we don't get to your questions on the webinar, what we will do is respond to you directly via email. So John, are you ready?
I am indeed, Warren. Thank you very much indeed, and welcome. Good afternoon, good morning to everybody, wherever you might be. Um, just thank you for the build-up, Warren. Just perhaps a brief word of background. As you see, today's session is focused on SaaS business development and planning. And it's a very broad topic, as you might see. So I thought what I'd do, rather than going through a presentation of lots of bullet points, I'd perhaps share with you some experiences and war stories. My own background, obviously been in the IT industry for 20, 30 years in and around channels, but I got involved in investing and setting up a SaaS company about 7 years ago in and around, as it happened, the SAP arena. And for the last 5 years or so, I'd say Delta increasingly has been engaged with SaaS vendors, their partners, ISVs, who are moving or born SaaS and cloud. So for my sins, I travel a lot around the world. This year I've been out to the US and the Caribbean and Germany and Holland. So I wanted to share with you some war stories, I thought. Perhaps I should hide the identity of the innocent to protect the innocent. And I'm going to also keep it at a sort of anecdotal level. You will see that later in the series we will be getting more analytic in terms of presenting tools and model and data and stats. So I thought hopefully you can join us for the whole series. I would start in that mode. So you can see for the topics we're about to discuss, the way we positioned and market this series in this particular edition was to look at increasing and improving margin and looking at new ideas for that. But I also want to dive a little bit deeper. Why do we need higher margins? What are the risks and opportunities for a SaaS or cloud business? And then as we move through, I think it's really important, wherever you are on this journey, to understand how far you've come, what the competition are doing, and how far you've got to go. It sounds fairly basic, but part of that does introduce, which I'll repeat many times, the business metrics from soft letter. It's really important to work on hard values to have clear and accurate dashboards. And then some other topics which aren't new but are vitally important in my book around development of really effective value propositions, how you can use pricing in a win-win situation for yourself and for customers. Looking at new markets, export markets. Again, some anecdotes there. Excuse me, something's just excuse me, just lost my screen for a moment. Hopefully we're back with you. Warren, can you see my screen now? I had a little technical hitch there. Warren?
John, yes, I can. I can see
Okay.
your screen, and you're coming through loud and clear, John. Thank you.
Yeah. One of the joys of using software, you get little reminders there. And then towards the end, talking about effective executions. So let's rock on with this. This is a stat which, big picture, I think we've seen these numbers before, and it's great working with Gartner and IDC and others that they are forecasting massive growth. I'm not going to read each of these balloons, but what we're really seeing, dating back 5 years ago, we were talking to people about SaaS and cloud, and it was really early adopters and evangelists. Certainly in the last 6-9 months, we're seeing an increasing acceptance by end users who are driving this demand, and there's 3 basic reasons why. First of all, the technology works. Secondly, there's overpowering economic drivers. And thirdly, people want it, they like it, they need to use it. It's becoming part of their DNA. So that little stat in the bottom right-hand corner, I think, is significant, that 74% of all companies out there have a hybrid cloud strategy. So therefore, if we're going to increase our margin and be successful as vendors and partners, we've got to be very good at operating in a hybrid world. A few years ago, as I said, we were talking to people about the opportunity for SaaS and cloud and why you needed to transform your business. Hopefully most of you are in front of a screen and can see these points, so I don't intend to read each and every one of them out. But very much now we're into how do we do the transformation, how do we do it effectively, how do we increase margin? And to share my first anecdote, because it always tickles me, I was working with a German company recently, who were a family-owned company, been around for many years, and we were sat down with the board, with the CEO, the CFO, and the chairman, and to the little graphic in the bottom right-hand corner, they'd been on premise for all of those 40 years, and when we went through the reasons they needed to transform, he summarized my morning's discussion with them as simply as, if we don't do it, we die. I wouldn't be as radical as that, but certainly for many, many companies, it is a necessity to do it, and a necessity to do it quickly. So let's start to focus on the whys and the how-tos. If you look at this chart, as SaaS or cloud business, as in any business, there's opportunities and risks. Could spend an hour on each of these points. Obviously, a subscription revenue business is, the la-la land that we want to get to. If you can achieve it and get it healthy, then everything else is great beyond it. We'll talk later about new customers. We'll talk definitely about the necessity to lower your cost of sales and the impact that that's going to have. We'll also look at things that are going to be detrimental, and I'll come back to those. But this is where we really need to focus in terms of driving the higher margins. I've got a more detailed chart here, and I wanted to spend a couple of minutes just talking about why do we need to increase margin. Well, I suspect that some of you who are on the call today are shareholders, owners in your companies, and the trend over the last few years has really been about driving the valuation or the asset value of your company. And I think there's really differing views now on how SaaS and cloud companies are being valued. Can you still get the 5 times multipliers? We've been talking recently to private equity investors, we've been talking to brokers, we've got a couple of companies that have looked to be sold to go into merger and acquisitions. I just want to share with you 2 different approaches to this. So we were working with a company, again in a very mature market, which was around utilities and asset management. The company was based in Germany, actually, very conservative management style. And we spent quite a bit of time working with them, looking at the risks and rewards of moving to a cloud-based model. They eventually decided that yes, they'd do that, and they also decided that it was worth having the company valued as they stood today, working out what it would cost to make the transition and how long it would take, and what the valuation would be at the end. Sensible approach. We obviously helped them with that. But their conclusion was quite a stunning one. Within 6 months of us engaging with them, they put together a detailed strategy and plan in terms of how they're going to transform the business, the applications and the solutions, and came to the conclusion that it'd be much better to sell the company now rather than go on a journey, because the multiple was right, and they actually successfully sold to a Canadian investment company. So you might want to ask yourselves sometimes about increasing margins and going on the journey. Do you need to? But just to show some balance there in terms of these anecdotes, we were talking to a UK company who had decided quite a while ago to move their clients from on-premise to a subscription model, and had a good degree of success. It was starting, it was taking time, and the revenues they were keen to get investment. They were keen to talk to private equity, keen to know what the valuation of the company would be today, and they were quite surprised actually. This is literally in the last few weeks that the multiples are starting to come down. But when we sat down with them and they worked out if they continued their growth rate in terms of annual recurring revenue and continued to increase their margins, having sunk the development costs, that actually if they hung on for another 3 years and got the multiples right in terms of their profitability, they could get several factors more in terms of the valuation by going through that journey. So there are different spectrums. So as we go through and we talk about margins, I think it's worth bearing in mind what is the ultimate objective of having that increased margin. Just a quick plug for Softletter, rather than me dreaming up these numbers, they'll be telling you in a couple of weeks' time about the sources for this information. But it's interesting to see that the vast majority of companies are on the journey, are seeing annual recurring revenues growing and growing quite strongly. We'll talk about profitability later. What about the risks? Risks that decrease margin. A constant theme for me this year and for many years has been about getting across that cash flow valley of death, and that really is a time-based one. But two that we're seeing recently that are really dragging things back are really having the right team in the right roles, and that goes right from your development team, where we've seen too many companies who have got existing on-premise solutions, using the conventional architects and development team to develop new cloud and SaaS apps. Now, whilst most people can do that, there are so many new approaches and ideas and architects and systems and processes that you've really got to bring in some skills. Don't reinvent. Do not reinvent wheels. The second one, which again is a subject, and I think Mark Sweetco will talk an awful lot about this, is getting your cost of sales right, getting the right skills and the right type of resource into your sales team. The use of inside sales reps, shortening sales cycles for conventional field-based sales reps. Those are the two areas that I'd say are damaging margin the most. So this graphic's gone a bit wrong, but basically what it says is that most SaaS and cloud companies are now profitable. A few years ago, you probably heard all the anecdotes that some of the market leaders have been in business for years and years and hadn't made a cent for their investors and had incredibly high valuations. Well, our feeling is those days are ending, and ending rapidly. Talking about ending rapidly, I wanted to move on just because of the time on the clock. We talked about factors that might impact your margin, and we actually track over 20 critical success factors. And they're all interrelated because, as you saw in one of the very earliest charts, in our experience, it is end-to-end in your business. It is about having a holistic approach. It is about having all the stakeholders on the same page. I'll tell this anecdote now before I forget, which is about a US company based in Florida, actually, that had a fantastic opportunity in a fantastic market around social media. They actually were doing a lot of development offshore, which we were trying to help them. It was a good idea in terms of costs and having some creativity and design. Where it went sadly wrong was the development team weren't joined at the hip with the sales and marketing team. Development team kept making lots of changes. By the time they got it to market, they'd burnt cash. The PE investors gave them 3 months to hit some desired uptake and target. Didn't happen. Pull the plug, whole company gone 3 months from launch. So the anecdote being that we would certainly suggest that there are a number of critical success factors right across your business that you need to be aware of. What we're showing here is a model we happen to use that looks at each of those so that you can hopefully get your stakeholders on the same page, but also you can get some feedback on industry benchmarks as to how you're comparing on this journey, bearing in mind, not only are hopefully all the folks on the call today on this journey, most people in the industry are, and they're at different stages. So it is a race. There is best practice out there now. So I think it's important that you continuously benchmark where you are, literally on a quarterly basis. and you focus on the areas that are damaging your margin the most, and they may not necessarily be the most obvious ones, as I've indicated. The finger always gets pointed at sales, that they're giving, I don't know, they're giving too much discount away, or the forecasts are over ambitious. We think there are certainly a lot of areas that contribute in a SaaS and cloud business that need to be aligned. So, moving on to value propositions, really already being cloud, being SaaS is quite passé. Talking about scalability, flexibility is very me too. We think that the value propositions are undercooked, as it were. They're not really speaking directly to business problems. We're working with a very large vendor at the moment who's trying exactly to do that, to get their sales teams more aligned. It's not new, is it, talking about the problems? But the thing I would point out is we've seen people who have launched cloud-based versions of what were previously on-premise solutions, which are what we call feature-free. They're not offering an awful lot more. People who are just offering the same solution but on a subscription type basis. I think you've got to be very clear. We used to call it your 80-20 function value ratios. That means what are the 20% of the functions that your customers really see the 80% of value from? And I think you've got to be very clear on what they are, and also how you differentiate from your competition. We'll talk about this later, that once you get your customers into the market for buying SaaS or cloud, you're exposing them to a vast array now of competition. You're not the only show in town, and they're going to have choice. So it's not very clear up front what your differentiators are in your value proposition. You're really going to struggle. We could go through some case studies. These are all companies out there. As it happens, these are in a social media marketing space, and we rely on external experts. We wouldn't claim to be experts ourselves in value propositions, but there's some very good niche players in there, and I would say, in terms of your margin and market penetration, more than ever, getting the right resource, getting the right creativity in this area is do or die. I love this quote down here on Twitter, which I'll read out to you, which is, people don't buy from you because they understand what you do. And isn't that typical of what we've always done, feature benefit? They buy from you because you understand what they do. And I think if you look at 90% of presentations and social media and so forth, it's the former, not the latter. What else can I talk about? Let's move on. Let's talk about pricing to win for your customer. I know today probably there's some vendors on there and ISVs, but there's probably a lot of value-added resellers and companies that work in channels. One of the big discussions that we've had over the last few years when we've been working with companies is, doesn't this mean, once we've got SaaS and cloud-based, a lot of the opportunity for what were conventional services are going to go away? Our answer is no. You can actually drive more from value-added services. They might be different. You can also drive higher margin value-added services, which of course will contribute to the overall solution costs. So in this little example here, this little model, we've compared with an on-premise solution with a software as a service. It might be your own on-premise solution and your new cloud-based version, or it might be historically what the customer is always using. But the bottom line is there are any number of ways that you can actually make a case for increasing value-added services. So all is not lost. Another way of illustrating that, we ran a series of seminars last summer actually in London. We had all kinds of companies, system integration companies, small and big, pure consulting, management consultants, and we had a very large discussion around what are these value-added services and consulting services that can be offered. Some of them, of course, aren't new, and if you're not comfortable being in business process, or you're not particularly strong in being a subject matter expert, well, maybe that's something you need to consider. Perhaps more importantly for me was the point that I made earlier, which is we're now living in a hybrid world. So everything to do with legacy data, multi-cloud, cloud environments, change releases, change management, retraining, user adaptation, all apply. So I don't think it's wise for you just to focus on your SaaS or cloud solution as if it's in some kind of vacuum or a silo. You have to be adept at solving the bigger business issue for people as to how do they integrate and manage that into the overall hybrid world. And to back that up, Rick Chapman's company and his research kind of follow the last couple of points for me, which is if you look at the primary reasons why people buy SaaS, it's not about saving money. So go back to the value-added services. If the total cost is similar, it's not just about that. You can see, to my point about the value proposition and differentiators and new capabilities, that's still the lead. So evidence to support my point. Moving on, we spent a lot of time with clients in all kinds of sectors. We originally did this in the banking sector. Actually, only 2 or 3 years ago, people were saying, mainstream banking aren't going to go for this. Front office, back office, security of data in the cloud, all those kinds of issues. Perhaps more importantly, in this particular model, we've shown a 5-year lifetime, to compare lifetime contract values. A lot of companies, historically have been 10 years or more. The point is that when we actually model what the overall lifetime contract value is of the complete solution, with the hosting and value-added services, and we compare it with on-premise, and we look at the total cost of ownership, there are only 3 possible scenarios. That over the lifetime it's going to cost more, which we know is true, right? If you rent a car or a house or a plane, it costs the same or it costs less. But in each of those scenarios, it is perfectly possible, and particularly when you have modeled it with the customer and you know the ratio of the lifetime contract value or total cost of ownership, when you add in the intangible benefits that we saw earlier, to easily justify a cost that is possibly more and richer in value-added services. Equally, as we've done with many customers and vendors, it's perfectly possible to show savings over the lifetime, which isn't necessarily a bad thing for a vendor. It gives them ability to upsell and cross-sell perhaps into other parts of the business, to introduce new modules and so forth. So, really important at the go-get and throughout your journey to constantly review your LCVs and TCOs. Market segmentation. This old cliche is true, isn't it? You got to get big, you got to get niche, you got to get out. I mean, it's a very hard game to get into from a volume point of view. A mantra that we've said many times, by the way, and I'll repeat it very quickly because we've been saying it for years. If you're an ISV and you're developing solutions, you really want to think about that as being your core IPR, and that's where you focus your time. If you can outsource anything and everything else, provisioning, hosting, even aspects of your sales and marketing, do it. Really, you'll never get to the economy of scale or perhaps as slick as creative as a specialist in that area. Leave this one with you as an extract from a book, but it's talking about vertical markets. Many of them. I want to talk about very quickly about export markets. I realize I'm running out of time. First thing which will come to you, which won't come as any surprise, if you're an on-premise business and you start to introduce SaaS and cloud, you're going to lose some customers. There's going to be some change right up front there. Why? Very simply, obviously some customers are happy and will run the existing solution into the ground till end of life. You're going to open it up to competition. You know, once one of the great advantages of SaaS and cloud and legacy data is it's increasingly easy to move it around. So I'd also maintain, though, that the minute you start to get into SaaS and cloud, or you're born in the cloud, you've got to look not just at your existing markets, but other market opportunities. Ecosystem-led means, you know, if you've got a relationship with a good managed service provider or other specialist companies, very likely they can introduce you to opportunity. But I want to go straight into export markets and new geographies. It's the scariest and best thing, if you like. It brings competition from overseas right onto your doorstep and right into your customer base. But it also gives you the opportunity to export. And I'm going to give you 2 or 3 very quick examples. We were helping a few years ago a very small New Zealand company, maybe 8 or 10 people, with accounting-based software, come into the UK market, very successful. We were working with an associate with a company based in Switzerland in security products. Right, if you're Swiss, next market you're going to go to is Austria and Germany. No. With a bit of insight and help, they went straight into China. You know, even with all the trade barriers and everything else, it's perfectly doable. That said, we were working with a very large PLC in the UK who thought they had a dominant position in one of the public sector markets. We were approached by 2 or 3 Indian companies who had a much more sophisticated and creative solution and started to undermine that market pretty quickly. So it's a double-edged sword, but I would maintain that there's the opportunity really to grow and expand there. Right, let me just move on. Okay, so effective executions, topic in its own right, but the one thing I would suggest is you really need to have good business metrics of your own, good dashboards, good visibility. Here we're just showing an example of 2 or 3 of the key metrics, you know, around being very clear about what your cost of customer acquisition is, about the number of new subscribers you're getting, how quickly you're getting, and vitally at the other end, what your churn rate is. And again, there's some great benchmark figures here, which we'll talk about next time, which say if you get over a certain threshold, your business is in real trouble. And again, churn rate's not just about number of customers, it's about the overall ARR and the stickiness. And remember what I said as well, I'd certainly recommend that you keep constant track, not just of these key margin influences, if you like, but the other 20 critical success factors on your journey. So, yeah, so this is something, actually it's a bit old now, but the point being here, as we've measured people, people are on the journey. There's very few people, to give you hope and heart, there's very few people who have completed the total journey in every aspect and are best of breed in every aspect. So as I'm sure you are smart and savvy by coming on a call today and, you know, looking for ideas, there's every reason to believe that during the course of the next 2-3 years during your transition, and as the SaaS and cloud market becomes predominant, that you can increase those margins and, as I mentioned earlier, end up with a very nicely valued company. So I'm just going to summarize quite quickly. I've already said, really important to understand where you are today, get real about what your objectives are and how you're being valued, and keep reassessing that. Can't overemphasize how important it is to have what we call a real value proposition, real differentiators, and, you know, explore today how you can build in those value-added services. Leads on to the pricing to win, doesn't it? Definitely achievable. I think any business, wherever you are, it is doable to increase your margin significantly, and to accelerate that journey. Warren, I think as ever I've rattled through. I've no idea where we are time-wise, but perhaps you could see if we managed to stimulate any discussion and questions. Just before I leave you, I think really as Warren had suggested, we're going to send you a copy of this presentation. There will be a recording, and also we're going to offer to people who attended today a free trial of one of the apps that we've got that contains some of the business plans and tools. And we hope to see you next time, which is in a fortnight's time, with the soft letter SaaS report presentation from Rick. Warren, with that, if you're there,
I am, John.
I was going to hand over to you to see whether, sorry, probably gone too fast, too quickly, as ever, but passionate about the subject. Have there been any questions or feedback, please?
Yes, John, we received a few questions. In the interest of time, we won't have time to answer them all, but as I mentioned earlier, that if we don't get to your questions on the webinar, what we will do is respond to you directly via email. So, John, first of all, thank you for that very insightful presentation on the SaaS environment, as well as the services offered by yourself and your partners in terms of transitioning to those services. We do have a few questions, as I mentioned. One question is from Thomas. Thomas is based in the United States in the New England area. And the question is, John, you have mentioned some models and some planning applications for SaaS implementation. Can you provide a little bit more detail about those planning applications and business models?
Oh, okay. Yes. Sorry. Probably as I race through things. Traditionally, we've been a management consultancy and traveled the world and talked to folks and sat in boardrooms and used whiteboards and used spreadsheets. What we've done over the last year, I suppose, is pull that together in an app or a series of apps. So you've got to practice what you preach, right? If we're talking about SaaS and cloud all the time. And this app, this particular app, is called Delta Plan or Delta Plan Partner. Some of the screenshots were from it, and that's what we're giving you a free access. So you can go and have a look at it, and it takes you through some of those steps in the journey. There's a version of the assessor in the critical success factors and the pricing models and the lifetime contract value. So that's certainly something that I'd recommend to folks if they're interested in drilling down on this a little bit.
Well, good, John. Thank you for that response. And we do have time for one more question. And this question is from Los, who is in the Netherlands. And Los asked if, John, if you could choose the most important factor of SaaS margin success, what would be the number one factor in implementing a SaaS program?
Okay, it's always hard to choose one. As I say, there's 20. I guess the one I would focus on would be time or speed. I think it's just so critical in this business. Your ARR and your churn rates are all time dependent. Your cash flow, your valley of death. The anecdote I told you about concurrent development and sales and marketing, they're all time-dependent aspects. I remember a really, really corny quote from my very first sales manager many, many years ago. He always said, anyone can sell $1 million, it just depends how long you take. And I think that's the challenge I would throw out there. The other way of looking at it is, if you only sell half as much in twice as long, can your business survive? But if you could sell twice as much in half the time, what would the value of your business be? So I would urge everybody to look at that when you're looking at for example, another classic would be your end-to-end sales process. How can you strip time out of it? Not just cost, how can you strip time out of it? It's all about that, because once you get across that valley of death, it's happy days for everybody. So time is my takeaway. Thank you, Warren.
You're welcome, John, and thank you for those responses. Unfortunately, ladies and gentlemen, I think it would behoove us to allow you some time between this electronic meeting and the next to allow you to access your next cup of coffee or your tea. So that will end our webinar for today. I would personally like to thank